The global chessboard is on fire. Ukraine is pushing beyond its borders. Kyiv is breaking into Belarus. Tsikhanouskaya is at the center of a geopolitical storm. Lukashenko is losing. The era of the diplomatic gray zone is ending. Kyiv is preparing a decisive move. Moldova is on the verge of a strategic breakthrough. Ukraine is close by. The Russian world of Transnistria is falling apart at the seams. The EU and the US are secretly preparing a liberation plan. The Kremlin is shaking. Putin's political rating is dropping to a historic low. I'll tell you all the details in a moment. Welcome to Ukraine Today. I am Victoria Perepelitsa, and here are the latest events. Aid to our neighbors is gaining momentum. Ukraine is officially betting on an alternative Belarus. It is now important to appoint a special representative of Ukraine who understands Belarus well and can promote the democratic agenda.
As for our recent relations with Belarus, there has indeed been a certain turning point. Because in the past, we tried not to notice the existence of this state, only occasionally commenting on strange statements. Lukashenko, now the situation has changed. This has renewed communication with Tsikhanouskaya, who represents, yes, the opposition in exile, and overall has ambitions to lead Belarus in the future in the event of democratic elections. Therefore, this cooperation is necessary. And in this way, Ukraine is showing that it fully They remember 2022, and they will forgive no one for anything. That is why we are building cooperation specifically with those representatives of Belarus who are, in fact, part of the democratic world, counting, of course, on an eventual change of power in this neighboring state. Candidate
Doctor of Public Administration and public policy expert Ilya Kotov emphasized that this indicates Kyiv's final abandonment of ignoring the Belarusian track and, moreover, the formation of a new strategy.
We emphasize that we do not actually regard Lukashenko as the president, as the leader of this state, but view him similarly to Putin, simply as a dictator who has held on to power for a very, very long time. That is why this needs to be done. Because, well, let's be honest, Belarus took its position back in 2022, and in fact, as of now, it hasn't changed. Maybe missiles are no longer flying at us from Belarusian territory. But still, they are helping the Russians in every possible way. So there is absolutely no point in turning a blind eye to this.
And now concrete steps. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine is already preparing candidates for the new position of Special Envoy on Belarusian affairs. And this is a key point. Essentially, this is about creating an alternative channel of communication not with the regime, but with the future of Belarus. After so many years of caution and pause, Kyiv is clearly demonstrating that the Belarusian track will no longer be a gray zone for Ukrainian diplomacy. And while Kyiv is making a diplomatic bet on a democratic Belarus and strengthening communication with Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, a completely different, quiet technological war continues on the northern front. Ukraine has eliminated a network that was helping Shaheds enter Belarusian territory. This was announced by Mikhailo Fedorov during a meeting with journalists.
We managed to eliminate the mesh network that the Shaheds were using in the north, which had a positive impact on the defense capability of Kyiv and central Ukraine.
We're talking about a modern communication system that allowed Russian kamikaze drones to coordinate with each other during attacks from the direction of Belarus.
But this network, which is used by many Shaheds, at the same time, they need to be connected to the control centers, to the Russian operators who manage the process. And such control points exist on Russian territory and used to be on Belarusian territory. What does it look like? It's an ordinary mobile operator tower, or some other kind, with a height of 70 to 80 meters, equipped with powerful antennas pointed toward Ukraine. So these are the kind of nodal points through which information from the Shaheds is transmitted to the control center.
In fact, this means that part of the infrastructure used for attacks on Kyiv and central Ukraine was connected to Belarusian territory. And here, politics and security converge at a single point. On one hand, there is a diplomatic bet on a future democratic Belarus. On the other, the elimination of real technical nodes through which the enemy launched deadly drones. And here's the key phrase. We are now talking about the actual neutralization of technical infrastructure that helped the enemy attack Kyiv and the regions.
Of course, we did not just stand by and silently watch this process of Shahed drone control from the territory of Prabe.
The Moldovan track is also on the official agenda of Kyiv. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs made a statement about Transnistria. According to Foreign Minister Andriy Sabiha, Ukraine is already contributing to strengthening Moldova's position. According to him, Kyiv is ready to consider Chisinau's requests for practical cooperation in the field of security.
We are already helping, both through the development of joint border infrastructure and by helping Moldova move away from Russian energy resources and through joint cooperation on the path to membership in the EU. Moreover, it is very important that this should be a joint effort.
Commenting on the possibility of military assistance, the minister noted that decisions in this area can be made exclusively by the Moldovan authorities. At the same time, Ukraine views Chisinau's intention to develop a new strategy for the reintegration of Transnistria positively and is ready to participate in the implementation of security initiatives if an appropriate request is made.
We are ready to help our Moldovan friends, but our main focus must remain on our own track. Although I share the opinion that, in reality, the security of Ukraine and Moldova is indivisible. That is why I am glad to see that the Moldovan side clearly recognizes the role and importance of Ukraine in regional security.
It is noteworthy that Chisinau, together with the EU and the US, is secretly preparing a plan to return Transnistria, accelerating integration with Europe, and receiving billions in bonuses. Moldova, in cooperation with the European Union and the United States, is developing a plan for the reintegration of Transnistria, but will not disclose the details of this initiative. This was stated by Deputy Prime Minister for Reintegration Valeria Kyiv'S. He added that these developments will be made public at an appropriate time.
We are indeed actively working on a strategy or roadmap for reintegration. But, as you know, sensitive issues require caution. We need to carefully consider steps that will yield results over time. We cannot disclose every step in real time because that could be harmful.
The geopolitical chessboard is on fire. Ukraine is no longer just playing defense. The struggle for security extends far beyond its borders. Moscow is desperately trying to drag Belarus into the war, turning it into yet another military staging ground. In Transnistria and Georgia, the Russian military presence is only growing stronger. But the situation is changing rapidly. The Belarusian opposition is openly talking about overthrowing the mustached one, and the EU is issuing a tough ultimatum to the Kremlin to reduce its military presence in the region. Will a new political earthquake begin in the post-Soviet space? Find out in our report. While Russia tries to hold the front in Ukraine, the very geography of the war is beginning to change. Kyiv is becoming increasingly active in areas where Moscow's influence was recently considered unshakable. In Belarus, Transnistria, and Georgia.
Minimizing the influence of the Russian Federation beyond its borders is a security priority not only for Ukraine, but essentially for the entire civilized world and above all for the European continent. It is for this very reason that the goals of Ukraine, Europe, and the West as a whole are perfectly and completely aligned with one another. They are essentially one and the same.
Belarus is getting drawn deeper into the war. It is from its territory that Russia launches drones at Ukrainian cities. However, according to Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine has already destroyed the facilities that controlled these drones.
Modern relays for Shahed drones have appeared on the territory of Belarus. According to him, these are used to guide and coordinate strikes on Ukraine. But
this will not end here, because the dictators of the countries have signed a number of documents within the framework of the Union State. This is how Russia is slowly but surely devouring Belarus. In
the current international situation, against the backdrop of heightened tensions, especially on the western borders, it is vitally important for us to develop allied relations and strategic partnership between Belarus and Russia.
At the same time, resistance to the Lukashenko regime continues within Belarus itself. Holding new elections, constitutional reforms, supporting Ukraine, and pursuing a European path of development, these are all goals of the Belarusian opposition.
When analyzing the capabilities of the Belarusian opposition, just as when analyzing the capabilities of the Russian opposition, both the first and the second are puppet-like, artificial, as if they exist, but in totalitarian regimes, Lukashenko and Putin, without a doubt, are simply imitating some kind of activity.
A month ago, for the first time since 2020, there was a bilateral meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and the opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. But what does this mean?
It's a good thing. Again, according to Tsikhanouskaya's latest comments, after this contact, communication with the president of Ukraine has improved. Some kind of horizontal contact has been established with the Ukrainian special services, who have actively started to communicate with representatives of the Belarusian opposition on a regular working basis, rather than as a one-off occurrence. This is, again, in order to understand and gauge the mood within Belarus itself.
Another potential point of change remains Transnistria. Weakened by economic and energy crises, the region has, for the first time in years, found itself under increased scrutiny from Kyiv and its European allies.
For example, with weapons, military personnel, gas, and also electricity. Russia cannot help them with any of this. At the moment, it simply can't. Undoubtedly, this is causing negative sentiment within Transnistria itself. Undoubtedly, many are beginning to seriously lose faith in Putin's policies and in the Russian Federation. Now, there is even a widely held and seriously discussed opinion in Transnistria that Putin has simply abandoned them.
At the same time, the European Union has issued an ultimatum to the Kremlin.
Russia has occupied many territories and its troops are deployed in various regions, be it in Georgia or Moldova. Therefore, yes, to achieve lasting peace, it must be clear that they need to withdraw their troops from all the occupied territories where they are currently present. Of course, some say that these demands are unrealistic. But let's be honest, the demands from Russia are completely unrealistic.
European initiatives are increasingly calling for the withdrawal of Russian troops not only from Ukraine, but also from Transnistria and even from Georgia. In fact, a new security system is being discussed.
The configuration right now for such an eye-opening experience for the residents of Transnistria, for the reality is now as clear as possible.
But while Russia is isolated in Transnistria, in Georgia it still retains powerful direct military levers. In Abkhazia and South Ossetia, while at the same time keeping the rest of the country in a state of high economic dependence.
Russia's influence in Georgia is no longer quite as straightforward or clearly defined as it once was, especially back when such massive, large-scale infrastructure initiatives were not being actively implemented. This includes major new economic and logistical projects being driven by major international global players. Now, Georgia could potentially become something like a strategically positioned neutral buffer zone, so to speak, for the entire region.
And of course, the people of Georgia themselves are not satisfied with this.
I'm here for a very simple reason: to protect my European future and democracy in my country. We participated in the elections and they were clearly rigged. And up to now, we have done everything in our power to show that we want a European future.
We do not want to be part of Russia. We want to be part of Europe, and we belong to Europe. The war continues not only on the battlefield. Today, the confrontation between Russia and the West is becoming increasingly evident beyond Ukraine, in countries where the future security of the entire region is being decided. A global game on the edge? Ukraine is making unexpected moves and sending military drone instructors to the Middle East. But the intrigue is only heating up. What exactly will Kyiv receive in return for this assistance if the Ukrainian sky is still facing a serious shortage of air defense systems? Will this mission become part of a larger geopolitical deal? Find out in our report.
4 years from help us close the sky over Ukraine to help us, Ukrainians. The countries of the Middle East are struggling, just like the Americans. Only Ukraine has proven capable of countering Iran. As a result, official Kyiv was approached for support, and Ukraine did not stand aside. Ukrainian specialists are traveling together with countermeasure equipment to the countries of the Persian Gulf.
We understand what is happening, what kind of war is going on there. We discussed some details regarding the strikes on the Gulf countries. We expect that we will coordinate our actions. In Europe, we are also coordinating with certain countries to ensure that Europe's interests are protected, and to ensure that the destabilization around Iran does not lead to increased problems in Europe.
For now, it is only a matter of sending Ukrainians to Jordan to guard American bases, but it is likely that over time Ukraine's assistance will be scaled up. Volodymyr Zelensky reported that there are already 11 requests from Iran's neighboring countries, European states, and America for assistance in countering Iranian drones. The goal is noble, but such assistance also carries risks. The main concern is, are we weakening ourselves with these actions? Our own defense capability. And this risk does indeed exist, but we also cannot abandon the countries of the Middle East. Firstly, thanks to the countries of the Persian Gulf, prisoner exchanges are taking place. And Ukraine will not forget this assistance. But secondly, it's time to move beyond statements of deep concern and start helping with real actions. Who, if not Ukrainians, knows how important this is?
We fully understand that this conflict we face is a completely different war and entirely new kind of war. And our experience is unique. And if we truly appeal to the undeniable fact that we are currently fighting against a menace that threatens the entire world, to the fundamental idea that the international community has a responsibility to become more deeply engaged in our war, both in terms of immediate military assistance and long-term economic investments, then, of course, we must clearly demonstrate our commitment. Our broad and inclusive global perspective is essential, and it is manifested precisely in such significant things as these.
Altruism is far from the only reason for sending Ukrainian specialists from drone counteraction systems. There is also a pragmatic side to the coin. In the future, such assistance could turn into income for Ukraine. The Persian Gulf countries are countries with a lot of money.
They eventually realized that many Russian military systems, when it comes to the challenge of fighting off drones, that is competing for control of the lower airspace, specialized systems like the Panzer have proven to be notably and significantly insufficiently effective. And this is an unprecedented opportunity for the Saudis to decisively move away from and finally abandon these incredibly expensive Russian military systems, and instead start to invest heavily in our own domestic production and in the future of our defense industry, including for themselves, but for us, it's additional money for us.
But thoughts about the future aren't so comforting when the threat is looming right now. Hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles are flying toward Ukraine every day. And while Ukraine has learned to fight UAVs, countering ballistic missiles remains a difficult issue for Ukrainian defense capability. Everything depends on the help of Western allies. If you look at the statistics for the use of Patriot missiles compared to the Middle East, it's not encouraging at all. According to official data provided by the President's office, Kyiv has received only 600 missiles for this American air defense system during the entire war. Meanwhile, in just the first days of the war in Iran, Middle Eastern countries used more than 800 Patriot missiles. And perhaps assistance in combating drones in the Middle East will help Ukraine receive more missiles for air defense systems.
The more drones that are successfully intercepted and neutralized by our interceptors, with the help of our specialized technical expertise and our advanced technologies, the more we can effectively justify the acquisition of a much greater number of Patriots.
Official Kyiv also expects that in exchange for assistance, Middle Eastern countries will provide diplomatic support in pressuring Russia to achieve a ceasefire.
Many influential Middle Eastern countries currently hold significant strategic leverage over various members of the wealthy Russian elites. We remember that their families, their real estate, their capital,
their businesses, their registrations, they are all located there. In particular, for example, in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. In other words, Russians are present there. And this has been sort of a remarkably quiet and safe haven for various Russian business interests and enterprises, serving as a convenient location to launder illicit money and to legitimize all sorts of high-end foreign purchases and investments.
The Persian Gulf countries can help put pressure on the Russian Federation not only out of gratitude, but also because they have become unofficial adversaries of Russia. The terrorist state is once again taking up its favorite position. While Ukrainians are going to help with defense, Russians are helping with the attacks. According to the president of Ukraine, there is information that Russians are providing intelligence to Iran to help adjust strikes against Americans. In addition, Russian components are being found in Iranian Shaheds. Isn't that a reason to put pressure on the Kremlin?